welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is our final THEC facilitated OE Week webinar for the week. We appreciate so much the time that y'all have devoted to learning about open education. As you know, Open Education Week is an annual celebration. Let me stop and introduce myself. My name is Ryan Korstand, Director of Academic Affairs here at THEC. OE Week is an annual celebration. It's put on by OE Global. And the goal is to provide an opportunity for sharing and learning about the latest achievements in open education. I'll post a link in the chat in just a minute to OE Global's OE Week schedule. A bunch of those activities have been recorded, and you can sort of go and learn about other OE Week events next week or on your own schedule. At THEC, we facilitated 10. This is the 10th of the webinars that we facilitated this week. All these recordings will be available next week or the week after, depending on how quickly I can get the transcriptions edited and up. But we'll share those on the we'll share the recordings on the Tennessee Open Education Hub and through our listserv. Details for joining the listserv and joining the Tennessee Open Education Hub are going to be provided in a link that I will send in the chat right now. To join the listserv, you just have to email us academic.programs@tn.gov, and to join the Open Education Hub, you can just follow the link to a step-by-step guide that's there. One final piece of logistics is just that this is a webinar. Please put questions in the chat. You can put questions at any time in the chat. And at the conclusion of the presentation, we'll have some time for questions, and I'll come back on to facilitate those questions. So you can drop them in the chat. You can make them private to me, or you can open them to everyone, whatever your preference is. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and mute myself and turn things over to our presenters. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. How are you all doing today? Hope it's warm where you are. I want to go ahead and start before I even introduce myself and acknowledge that everyone else who is on camera right now is much more dressed up than I am, but it is Friday and it snowed in Oklahoma, so it is a sweatshirt day. So sorry, not sorry, I guess is what I should say there. My name is Matt Upson. I am the Associate Dean for Research and Learning Services here at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. I'm here with my colleague, Melissa Mallon, who I'll turn it over to very quickly. Introduce herself.
Thank you, Matt. I am Melissa Mallon. I am here in Tennessee at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Teaching and Learning in the Vanderbilt Libraries. And not with us today is our wonderful kind of co-partner in crime, Melia Fritch, who is at Kansas State University. She unfortunately couldn't be here today, but she is absolutely with us in spirit.
Thank you, Melissa. So what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to take a little bit of time and tell you about our group, this New Literacies Alliance that we are part of, what it does, why we do it, how this all works. So we want to show you some examples, show you some benefits of how our open lessons can be used by you, by your colleagues, by students to support instruction and learning efforts in terms of information literacy concepts. We also want you to be able to think about how the structure of New Literacies Alliance might provide some ideas for your own collaborative approaches to creating and sharing open lesson content. And we've got a chance for some questions at the end of the session. We definitely want to hear your questions and ideas about open education and information literacy and the intersections of those two topics. Okay, so what is the New Literacies Alliance, or NLA, all about? Well, in one quick sentence, our goal is to make meaningful and useful content for information literacies, digital literacies, media literacies that educators and students can easily and freely use. So the typical OER spiel with a little bit of that information literacy thrown in there. In a recent piece by Barbara Pfister, who's a librarian in Project Information Literacy, she reminded her readers that information and media literacy instruction often has no specific place in the curriculum. It's everywhere and it's nowhere. It's everyone's job, but nobody's responsibility. And in many cases, the people who care most about these literacies are the ones that have had their jobs filled by the austerity acts. So New Literacies Alliance was really born out of this recognition that there's a vital need for instructional support. An instructor's time is already stretched thin, especially when you're talking about library instructors who might be working with a lot of different units on campus, departments, different disciplines, and so this looks a little bit different for everyone. So with that in mind, the New Literacies Alliance has been shaped really over the past decade now by 10 partner academic libraries to provide open access, customizable information literacy learning objects that can provide opportunities for flipped classroom delivery, curriculum scaffolding, and so on. So a little bit about the history here. Librarians from Kansas State University and the University of Kansas Medical Center, with some support and feedback from a number of academic library deans and directors in Kansas, began to work on this project back in 2010. And they imagined the New Literacies Alliance as an interdisciplinary leveling platform for information literacy instruction in Kansas, ensuring all students that all students have been introduced to basic information literacy concepts before they engage with a librarian during an instruction session. So from the beginning, the effort has prioritized openness and collaboration with members of a design team bringing their own unique experiences as well as the needs of their campus to the table. So the group really hit its stride around 2015 and began to expand. And so we added more contributors from some other institutions. And NLA has continued to build out new lessons, update existing ones, and we've been intentionally working to design them so that they align with and expand upon the practices and dispositions that are highlighted in the Association for College and Research Libraries Framework for Information Literacy, which we'll touch on more momentarily. These lessons are primarily designed for college and high school students, and our instructional designers work with our librarians on lesson design teams to build out these lessons. And then these lessons go through a testing and feedback process with students before these lessons are finalized and released out into the wild. And again, our lessons are based primarily on the ACRL framework for information literacy. So a quick bit of context for those of you who may not be familiar with this framework. This structure you see here replaced the ACRL information literacy standards about 6 years ago now, and has provided kind of the base, the grounding for our NLA lessons. So I'll quickly quote from this framework document that's linked here. So this framework is based on a cluster of interconnected core concepts with flexible options for implementation, rather than on a set of standards or learning outcomes or any prescriptive enumeration of skills. At the heart of this framework are conceptual understandings that organize many other concepts and ideas about information, research, and scholarship into a coherent whole. Knowledge practices, which are demonstrations of ways in which learners can increase their understanding of these information literacy concepts, and dispositions, which describe ways in which to address the affective, attitudinal, or valuing dimension of learning. So big chunk of text from that framework, but this is basically what NLA was doing or responding to. We knew that instructors were trying to grapple with this new framework after the shift from the old standards, from that more prescriptive approach where they can more easily just kind of tick down a list and say, okay, the student did this, student did that. And there was some struggle, some confusion, some questioning as they were trying to find time to adapt to, I think, what we believe to be, it's obviously a looser, more open approach to looking at information literacy concepts. But we think it's also more valuable because it takes into account more viewpoints and more ways to demonstrate learning. But still, there was that struggle. And so again, that's what the New Literacies Alliance was responding to. So as noted, and obviously with the topic of this conference overall, these lessons are openly licensed. We have a Creative Commons attribution, non-commercial, share-alike license assigned to each one of these lessons. We currently have 12 lessons that are tied back to that ACRL framework. And you can access the content directly from our NLA webpage. And as we'll describe here momentarily, you can request links to then integrate that content into your local LMS. But our lessons are also available in or linked from OER and information literacy repositories, such as the Community of Online Research Assignments, which is called Project Cora, which is a great information literacy lesson repository, the ACRL Framework Sandbox, as well as OER Commons. And we're also really proud to say that NLA was selected to receive an award from ACRL in 2016, is this Instruction Section Innovation Award. And we have multiple lessons that have been accepted to the ACRL Instruction Section peer-reviewed instructional materials online database. That's a mouthful, but we always want to make sure to share these with peers, not only to give them something that they can use, but to get feedback and to really make it a peer-reviewed process and lessons that are reviewed by students, as I mentioned a moment ago. So our goal is to build content that's agnostic in a variety of ways. We want it to not only be usable and accessible to our students, whether they access an HTML lesson in their browser, on their phone or their laptop, but also want it to work with a variety of LMS platforms, so as open as we can make it. Additionally, we try to keep our branding to a minimum so that it doesn't interfere with your own institutional branding. I know that here at Oklahoma State, when we've talked about using these in certain scenarios, our various offices, whether that's an academic department or our marketing or branding offices, they always want to plop the OSU logo on there. So we know that's important at some institutions, and we want to make sure that there are the fewest number of barriers to branding that in your own way. So obviously, if it's open content, you can easily repurpose a lesson in whatever way you choose to do. And as I noted previously as well, we're depending on an assortment of volunteer librarians and instructional designers who work in libraries from 10 colleges right now in the US and 10 universities. And we're definitely open to more support, especially in terms of instructional and curricular design. We did get some more partners on this fall and spring. So we're trying to decide how we want to grow and what level is sustainable for the number of people we have and the amount of work that can continue. So that being said, how do our partners and participants benefit from a relationship with NLA? Well, first and foremost, the NLA, we hope, is a fun organization to be a part of. We're all passionate educators. We're all very engaged in open education and information literacy. And this collaborative aspect of instructional design and lesson building really lets us benefit greatly from our colleagues' expertise. We found that it's very useful for maybe smaller colleges and institutions that don't have a big, a large department for information literacy instruction, or maybe a single librarian is doing a whole lot of different things on their campus, and they can't devote time and effort to not only just thinking about a lesson, but designing it and implementing it. And so this collaborative exercise really provides a lot of support for our group. And so technically speaking, for instructors and librarians that would like to use these modules, these NLA lessons are ready-made and customizable, good for many scenarios, including different disciplines and grade levels, as we mentioned. Another great benefit of NLA is that we are attempting to contribute to a bigger cause. And as you'll see in just a moment, these lessons are used globally, which allows us and our participant members to have an impact on a larger scale past their own institution. And so again, here at Oklahoma State University, where we're founded on a land grant mission for outreach and supporting past the confines of the university. That's a big deal for us, and that lets us participate on a much broader scale that we can then go back and tell my dean, our provost, our president, Oklahoma State University is participating in open education, participating in information literacy on a really broad scale. And while we won't get into details on it now, we found that over the past 2+ years now with the pandemic, this has really been something that, even though we slowed down our lesson development, just because we knew our librarians were going to be swamped, our instructional designers were taking on other tasks on their campuses as their courses moved online. So while our processes slowed down a bit, our lessons were still being used at a really high rate. And so we've been really, I think, grateful to know that the work we did ahead of the pandemic was really useful during the pandemic. and thinking ahead to, whatever directions we take in education. If we have more online courses in the future, which it seems like that's the direction, if, heaven forbid, there's another pandemic or a reason that we move online, we know that we've got a good base for developing content and sharing content. So here's just a little bit about our impact. These numbers are slightly out of date, so hopefully they're a bit higher here, but as of earlier in the spring, these lessons had been taken about 80,000 times, really across the world, every US state, as well as 84 countries. As I mentioned, we were awarded a 2016 Innovation Award, and we're contributing to some shifts in instructional practice. As far as recent lessons go, here's just a list of what we have done. I will say this, the top bullet, this fact-checking and web literacy lesson has been in development for maybe 4 years. It was, as you can imagine, a rapidly changing topic that came to the forefront of news and information literacy courses a few years ago. And as we were developing that lesson and things kept changing, we wanted to make sure we were staying up to speed with current research. And then without getting into too many details, the Kansas State Library had a fire, which slowed things down. And then we had the pandemic. So that one is still in development. It's still coming soon, but we will get it done. We currently are working on lessons for data privacy for students, thinking about their data ownership, how are they protecting themselves, whether that's at their institution, whether that's on the open web, what are they submitting, how are they thinking about their own data as theirs and protecting it. And then we're also doing a lesson on using Google for academic research. Other than this fact-checking and web literacy topic, we're also thinking about more data literacy modules, as well as some modules on copyright, maybe some scholarly communications, further lessons on that. This is just a quick look at what you see when you get into the Open edX page for New Literacies Alliance. Just a menu of some of our options. So just a look and feel kind of view here. So as far as using the lessons, as I mentioned, we've tried to keep these things agnostic. So that's not just institution agnostic, but technology agnostic, vendor agnostic. So hopefully they can be used on any campus. Each lesson takes around 8 to 15 minutes to complete, and these lessons can be embedded into an LMS, or they can be linked to from websites like a LibGuide, just with an HTML link. So each of these lessons includes some assessment questions for student learning. When they're embedded in an LMS, the assessment questions can then be tied back to a course gradebook. When you simply use an HTML link, no scores are recorded, although the students would receive on-screen feedback. And so when the librarian or whoever is coordinating this access, if the librarian has access to the scores through the LMS, they can then see which students completed the lesson, how they scored, and then do that follow-up, determine who knows what concepts need to be reinforced, or if students can move on to maybe more discipline or assignment-specific concepts. We have more documentation on the webpage about how this is set up. This is just kind of a configuration schematic. Very simple. I went through it a couple of weeks ago here on campus myself with our, I won't say recently changed LMS, but I set up a test course just to experiment. And it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. And we get a couple of questions every month or so about how to integrate into the LMS, and we're able and happy to answer those very quickly. So this, again, just provides that greater sense of engagement and embeddedness within a course for these lessons. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Matt. So just a little bit of a deep dive looking at one of the specific lesson modules within Open edX. So this is the evidence-based practice module, which is one of the newer lessons that we've created. It just gives you a sense here of what the student kind of processes, what they get to see when they're going through these lessons. And so this is an example of one of the embedded assessment activities that not only creates an engaged learning environment for students, but it also is really helpful as Matt mentioned, for that learning assessment. Especially if you're using the LTI links to have the NLA lessons embedded into your LMS. It connects right to the gradebook, Blackboard, Canvas, Brightspace, whatever, D2L, whatever you're using. And so that's really a great way that the instructor can go in and just quickly take a look and see how students did. And again, as Matt mentioned, that kind of the idea of reinforcing concepts that may need a little bit more coverage on a one-to-one basis with the librarian, for example. So we're going to shift gears a little bit from the kind of technical specifications of the lessons and talk a little bit more about some specific examples and some discussion on how to use these pedagogically, how kind of underscore the why you might want to adopt NLA lessons into your instruction. So the very topics, which you can pop over to the website and take a look at while you're listening right now, there's a range of topics, and they all sort of have this underlying theme, again, connecting to the foundations of information literacy and digital literacy in a lot of components, but really encouraging students to engage in problem solving and analysis. So for example, if you're wanting your students, let's say you teach a literature class, and you want your students to track and comment on how the discussion related to a particular piece of poetry has changed over the years, or you teach a general chemistry class and you want your students to investigate the information landscape related to vaccines, vaccine adoption or hesitancy or whatever that looks like, which certainly that conversation has changed over the years. Any of these types of questions that you want your students to get into all revolve around the way information is created, shared, used, and produced. And so the NLA lessons, each of them kind of packaged out on their own or combined together, can create a really interesting experience for students to kind of scaffold their way through these conversations. For example, you could have students complete the scholarly conversations lesson and the question authority lesson, so they can see, again, how information is produced, who's participating in conversations, and then also, the healthy skepticism that's required when you're engaging with information sources and thinking about the way it's disseminated. So these types of packaging can really help produce that opportunity and environment for critical thinking to be integrated throughout your course or program. We have on our website some different ways that you can sequence the lessons together. So there's a link to that here in the slides to help you kind of think through some examples. One of the things that we like to say about these lessons is that they're ideal for hybrid learning environments, remote learning environments in particular, but especially hybrid, where you have a healthy amount of in-person conversation as well as some asynchronous or online learning. The lessons, we kind of went into this just a minute or so ago, but they can be used as standalone objects. So if you have one specific course or say a workshop that you're wanting students to engage in, or they can be packaged together as that kind of a sequential learning opportunity. So they're very scalable, they're flexible for all sorts of different curricular opportunities, whether again, that's a single course or an entire program that students are working through. So some other kind of specific examples of what that may look like. Again, with the lessons being able to be scored, if you're using that LTI integration into your LMS, the lessons can be assigned as homework, which happens a lot. So that kind of helps with that flipped classroom approach. Maybe have students complete the lessons before a course discussion. They can also be integrated into degree programs. So librarians can help collaborate with faculty thinking about those foundational courses, research or literature review type courses, capstones at the end of a program. And your librarian or those of us in the New Literacies Alliance can help you think through how the lessons can be integrated throughout that kind of mapped throughout the curriculum for a specific program. We do really recommend that the lessons are scaffolded. So obviously they're great for kind of a one-off or reinforcement related learning opportunity. But when they're scaffolded throughout a curriculum, it gives students those opportunities to build on the foundational information literacy skills that say they learned in their gen ed courses or hopefully in high school, and then apply that learning over time as they progress through their academic career. So a couple of specific course examples to give you a sense of, so you can just see what this looks like. This is an example from our colleague Melia, who is based at Kansas State University. So this is a series of NLA lessons you're seeing on the top part of the screen here that students in an upper level education course complete as part of their regular coursework. And they're able to create connections with the other readings and assignments in their course. And you can see in this one that the lessons are worth different points based on the instructor's pedagogical goals for that particular lesson. But overall, the NLA piece is still, 10% of their final grade, which is pretty impressive. In this example, this is from the student view of Canvas. So you can see an example of what the students might view when they are looking at an embedded NLA lesson. This is just for a gen ed English course at Kansas State. So they have probably one of the better examples we know of really embedding these NLA lessons into their gen ed curriculum in their English 200, I think it's 200 and 201 courses. So this particular course has a library research assignment that is a requirement. And the librarian has actually been embedded or added to the Canvas course here. And so they're able to go in and add the lesson and then also go in and grade. They don't have to grade because it's done automatically, but they're able to go in and see the grades and do that reinforcement as needed. I think this one in particular was related to an assignment that includes source evaluation and fact checking. So it kind of makes those connections for students, gives them opportunities to really engage with the material. So we're going to take a little pause for a second here. We've talked about how the NLA lessons are used in different contexts, and we'd like to give you a few minutes to think about your own instruction and how some of the lessons might fit into what you do or what you want to do. So think about a course that you're teaching. It could be an online course, it could be an existing lesson or unit within a course that you're teaching. That might benefit from some sort of reinforcement or introduction of new research, information literacy, or critical thinking skills. If you're a librarian joining us today, think about the sessions that you teach or the faculty that you work with. Are there possibilities for some flipped instruction approaches? And we've put the NLA lesson links in the chat. So we're going to give you a second to, if you haven't already, just kind of browse through the site, look at the different lessons. And then we'd love if you would share in the chat which lessons you could see fitting into your pedagogical goals and what that might look like. And then I think we have we do have a question, so we'll address that while we're giving you a second to kind of look through the website. Katie, love that you want to use them in all of your classes. You are helping us with our little prompt here. So Katie has asked about self-paced lessons. Are they required to sign in? They're not required to sign in, but in order to engage with the assessments on the Open edX platform, it does require students to create a free account and sign in. Matt, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, and also there is someone operating a leaf blower immediately outside my window, so you may hear that as well. I just wanted to also share a response to Katie's question that we could, I don't think anyone's actually has requested like a separate document with the assessment questions, but we could absolutely provide that. If you don't want your students to have to log into Open edX, we can provide that documentation for the assessment piece separately and go that way. Because again, open, we want you to share, we want you to adapt. We want to get that information to you if you need it. And he's turning on the blower even louder, so I will mute myself.
Does anyone else have any examples that they might like to share, or context that you can see, maybe including the lessons into your work? If assessments are accessed through the LMS integration, does the login process work the same? Yes. Right? Matt, are you speaking? You're muted.
No, I was reading it out loud because
Oh,
this is so loud on my side. I couldn't hear myself talking almost. Okay, so if the assessments are accessed through the LMS integration, does the login process work the same? No. So Ryan, I think what you're asking is, so if you're accessing through the Open edX site, just the HTML web page, they have to log in to see the assessment. If it's embedded in the LMS, they would log into the LMS like they normally would with institutional credentials, but they don't have to log in to see the assessment pieces. Those would be embedded in there. I think that's what you're asking. Let me know if that's not. Okay, excellent.
Katie, do you have a sense of, based on your assignment that you already have students do, what lessons might fit in? If you have thought about it that far, we'd be interested. And Meg, thank you. Reading scientific research, data info, knowledge and wisdom, scholarly conversations, that is great. Predatory publishers, that's a really good question. We don't have any modules that go into that just like as a standalone on that topic in particular, but it does come up. And when we are getting to the one of our most recent lessons that we'll be coming out with momentarily in the next couple of months, we're getting a little bit more into that as well. But that's actually a really good idea of a standalone lesson. I think I'm going to make a note of that because we're seeing that, especially with open access publishing, that it starts to get really muddy. And I think for students and faculty, it can be a very confusing landscape. Okay, Nellie's looking at the citations. Okay. Okay, so Nellie, you're worried that the students drinking infographic might not necessarily be appropriate for a K-12 audience. That's a really good point. And I will say that we didn't really say this, but we have been, our primary audience for these from the early days has been higher education, specifically undergraduates. But we are really trying to work hard to engage with the K-12 audience, and I'll admit, we don't always think about the graphics and the images and what they may mean for different age groups. So thank you for that. I would say if you wanted to reuse that, then we could help you kind of think through a new infographic that you could use for that particular piece, just to kind of switch that out. I also think that content could probably, without seeing it off the top of my head, I think that it could probably be removed, and it wouldn't be a terrible situation. But definitely, I think we could help you identify a new infographic that would be or some sort of piece that would be appropriate to replace there.
Well, and I'll also mention, yes, thank you for bringing that up. And it's just one of the, I guess, blind spots, because even though we're creating, and I think some of us do have, I have some experience working in K-12, but it's been a while. And so most of the people, or all of the people in our group, are working in college academic libraries, right? And so that's one of the tough things about asking people for volunteer time is, I think with all of us on NLA right now, we all have that kind of volunteer outreach piece built into our job descriptions, whereas a lot of K-12 educators may not have the time or anything in their job description that allows for that. So we definitely would welcome more input like that. We'd love to have some people working with us, but we understand that may just be a lot to ask. Coming from a family of educators, my mom and my wife knowing how much or how little time they have to devote to that kind of thing, we understand. So anyway, excellent point for bringing up, and we appreciate the feedback there.
Yeah.
I see Ryan's question about lateral reading as well. And I do want to, I'm looking over here at some of my readings on lateral readings. Those should pop up in the news literacy lesson. That's one of the things, if you're familiar with Mike Caulfield and I'm blanking on
The
the
SIFT model.
Say it again.
The SIFT model.
Yeah, the SIFT model, and professor from Stanford, I'm blanking on his name. Anyway, big into lateral reading and those kind of concepts that have been, thank you, Sam Weinberg, that have been developing over the course of the past few years. That's one of the things that we kept going back to and say, okay, this has changed a little bit. This has changed a little bit more. We want to keep updating this lesson. So yes, Ryan, those concepts should be in there.
What we've discovered with the web literacy or sort of fact checking lesson is that there's so much to cover, and as Matt said, the landscape changes all the time. It's an evergreen topic, right? We can't not do it. So we're trying to think about, maybe even developing a sort of suite of lessons that cover some of the aspects, but we want to get something out and it will definitely include lateral reading. Oh, Nellie, that's wonderful. Yes, we will share some more information from you. Actually, this might be a good spot to go to our what's next slide, which I think is one more. Let's go one more, and then we can talk a little bit about what our future plans are, which does include engaging with new volunteers. So we want to talk a little bit about where we're going. You've heard a lot about where we've been, where we are. We are working very hard. We've relaunched ourselves into lesson development. We're finally at a point where our partner colleagues can take a breath and kind of jump back in and are excited to do so. We are also working right now on updating our existing lessons. So we want to make sure that the content is applicable and engaging. And to Nellie's point earlier, I mean, it raises a really good question about the content and the images and infographics and things like that we use, especially for the lessons that are a little bit older. We really want to get those updated. We would love to have folks remix them or kind of add their own spin and share those with us as well. In addition to having new people to work on the NLA project teams. We're also really looking to, in addition to just making sure everything's so applicable and engaging, we're committed to making sure our lessons are kind of furthering the DEI work that we all need to be engaged in. And so we want to make sure that our content is applicable to basically non-white, non-Western world points of view. And so that is one thing that we are really focused on updating with our current lessons. And then with all lessons that we go through in the future, we want to make sure to kind of look at that. And to the question about predatory publishing, I think that there is a lot of conversation to be had with kind of the global Southwest or Southeast and some of the different publishers that are super legitimate, but may, not necessarily have the same level of visibility as others, that may come from the United States, for example. So we're working on all of that. We also really want to create lessons that are focused on more specific disciplines or subject areas. So for example, that recent lesson that you saw on evidence-based research has a little bit of a medical, nursing, public health spin to it. But if you have ideas for things that would be really beneficial to your courses, we would love to hear that, hear those ideas. And then again, kind of, as Matt mentioned, digging in a little bit more to privacy and data and digital literacy aspects. In addition to some of the suggested sequences that we have for the lessons, we're working on creating more robust lesson plans that sort of package the models together with discussion questions, connected readings and bibliographies, more scaffolding of what the lessons could look like. And then we're also wanting to try and connect with other types of standards in addition to the information literacy framework, but do more alignment with things like the Common Core so that we can, again, expand the audience and make sure that these are applicable and ready for instructors at all levels. We've said this several times, but we really aim to solicit feedback of our resources from our stakeholders, which is all of you and our students. So if you have used any of the lessons, or if you plan to use any of the lessons that you've learned about today, we would love for you to share your feedback. We'll give you our email addresses here in a minute. But please send us feedback, positive or negative. We want to hear it all. Or let's say not negative, constructive. We would like your constructive feedback. And you know, to your point, Nellie, we are always looking for new partners. So we would love to work more with K-12 or you know the entire education spectrum. Any literacy-based organizations, folks from non-Western institutions, just to get that breadth of perspective and point of view as we are creating the lessons and also then testing them and making sure they're applicable to our students. Yes, Ryan, we do have some information on using the lessons. Let me pull that from our website. So you've got a section that talks a little bit about some of the pedagogical approach for the lessons, and then those kind of scaffolds and sequences that I mentioned earlier. We also have an instructor primer that is available through that link as well. They can help kind of think through what it looks like to use those lessons in your instruction. That's part of what we're working on right now too, is trying to kind of build a little bit more almost kind of ready-made lesson plans to help kind of think that through. But in terms of just general guidance for now, I would say looking through the lessons, thinking about your syllabus and assignments and where some of the lessons might fit into that, and then talking to your librarians, because this is what we do. And so they can help you kind of think through how you might integrate, like what point in your semester might you want to integrate some of these lessons, and also how they can supplement them, because as great as they are, they're not a replacement for your local librarian who can really offer a lot of more customized and specific research support and instruction for your students. So I think it's really important to engage them in the conversations as well. That's a great question, Julie. We were on a really excellent schedule of updating, and then the world kind of blew up. And so that created a more organic pathway for us. But as we are back on track now, involved in creating the new lessons, we're also back to updating the existing lessons. So we usually do that annually. And then that, you know, it includes checking for new research on that particular topic, seeing if any of the examples, you know, just again are out of date. We'll do focus groups with students to have them kind of go through and make sure that things still are relatable and understandable. And yeah, that we also really hope that people will let us know if you find something that's out of date, or, you know, your students are taking a lesson and a link doesn't work. We've got opportunities for you to send in feedback to us so we can make sure and update those on the fly rather than waiting for our updates at the end of the year. Summer is typically our update time because it's a little bit more free for our working member partners. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end of what we had wanted to talk about today. I feel like we've already gotten a lot of excellent questions, but you can see our contact info here. We would love to hear additional questions or ideas. And Nellie, you are welcome to email any of us, and we will make sure that you can get our contact information to your contacts. And we're also happy to just do a little abbreviated version of this presentation for your colleagues or your librarians or whomever you think might benefit from it. Or you can, I guess you can send them the video after it's up on the website.
All right, so maybe we can take one further call for questions. So if you have other questions, just drop them in the chat. And while people are thinking or just giving you great feedback on your presentation, either way, while people are writing in the chat, let me just say this has been really interesting, and it's a different way of thinking about sharing information than I'd considered before. And I just really appreciate the depth of thought that you've put into this, and the networking that it relies on. It's just been really, really helpful. I got lots of questions, so I'm going to probably bother you for a while after this is over. So sorry in advance.
Never bother. We love this.
So, yeah, well, it's great. Well, thank you all so much. I don't see all that, and I don't see other questions in the chat. I think we've had a lot of conversation through the webinar, and I appreciate y'all doing that. But thank you guys. This has been, like I say, just really provocative. I've got a lot to rethink after this, so I appreciate your time today. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of Open Education Week.
Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Happy OE week, I guess.